Hi, everybody. It's time for another Red Heaven podcast and beard progress video. These are here because it's a lot of hassle to move them, and I'm very inefficient with the way that I set up my hardware and my stuff. This is a microphone, and you know what? I'm going to explain all that stuff in another podcast because that's ridiculous. So, anyway, what am I here to talk to you about? Three things. I have released a new EP of three songs called The Little Temple. I've released the first of a series of songs for the upcoming collection. Album is kind of a funny word to use, given the fact that makes you think of like a record that you put down on a machine and you crank a thing and a dog chases a cat on a treadmill and the thing turns. But album is the right word. Okay, I've released The Little Temple, and I've released the first song of that collection of which I just spoke, called Echolocation. The song is called War Pigs, which is the classic Black Sabbath song. And I want to talk to you just a little bit about pricing and how I set pricing for these albums. So first, The Little Temple. There's no way to discuss Little Temple without giving you a little bit of a background on the Baha'i Faith, of which I am a member. The Baha'i Faith is an independent world religion founded in the middle 1800s by a Persian nobleman who Baha'is refer to as Baha'u'llah. It's a Persian sentence that means glory of God. So the basic teachings of the Baha'i Faith are threefold. I mean, there's a lot more to it than this, but this is sort of the core, that there's one intelligent, creative force in the universe. Some people use the word God, some people use other words for it. There's a lot we don't know about what that creative force is, but that one force is one and unified in itself. The second of the third things that I would say are core to the Baha'i teachings are the oneness of religion. So, for instance, all of the manifestations or teachers of God that have come throughout history, Moses, Abraham, the Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, Muhammad, Zoroaster, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah, are all essentially teachers of the same religion, of the same faith, that each religion is different depending on the time and where you live, and so on, and sort of the exigencies of the society in which you call home, but that essentially they are evolutionary steps, not disparate and warring philosophies. And the third thing that Baha'is believe is that the world is one human family. So in the past, all through our history, we've had extensive conversations and fist fights and name calling about, whether, you're black, you're white, you're yellow, you're poor, you're rich, you're male, you're female, and creating those divisions. Core aspect of the Baha'i teachings is that we are essentially one. We're all different. There's a great deal of diversity between us, but that planet we live on unites us as one humanity. So, not everybody who is into the Red Heaven stuff is spiritually inclined, which is totally fine. But I'm giving you some background on the EP, The Little Temple. Why I'm telling you this is because one of the Baha'i festivals is called Rizvan. It occurs around April. If I'm wrong, don't correct me. Just pretend, just nod and smile. And I was asked to play some music at the Rizwan Festival this year in Ottawa, which is really close to where I live. And I did, and I wrote some songs that were specifically meant for that festival. And it was super cool. It was huge, and I played some music, and some people sang, and they decorated the place. It was just amazing. It was about 400 people. It was pretty amazing. I can't pull 400 people to a Red Heaven show, but Rizwan's a different matter. So, when I was done these songs, I was like, you know what? I'm done the songs. I've already sort of tracked them and composed them and all this stuff. So why don't I just release them? So I looked at what I had created for Rizwan, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to add a few things. So I brought in my friend Bruno Random Bjarnson, who is from Madagascar. He lives here now and has for a long time, but great voice, very low, like a very deep baritone, and just a very sensitive man, very musical, very naturally musical, and just a great guy. So he sang on two of the three songs. And I also brought Mary Claire Sadon, who is a violinist. Here I am miming it like you don't know what violin is. and she played violin on all three of the songs, and it was wonderful. It was really really nice. So these songs, like The Undivided Heart, which we released last year, these songs are spiritual in nature. They take from the mystical writings of the Baha'i faith and set that to music. That's what I did, and I like it. You know, it was stuff that I did sort of to kind of be a little meditative and a little bit. You know, just to sort of go in a different direction. A lot of the music I do is very rock, and I love rock, and I'm going to keep playing it, I'm going to keep writing it, and I'm going to keep doing it, but I just thought this was a nice thing to do on the side. And, you know, this is a different discussion, but I think rock musicians do well to remember that it's good to be able to do a lot of stuff and not just rock music, but, you know, that's a whole other thing. So that's done, that's released, and I'm charging pay what you want from Bandcamp. You're not going to get that off iTunes. I didn't put it on iTunes. I don't know if I will put it on iTunes, and I'm going to explain that because the pay what you want system and iTunes are not compatible. So I'll get to that in a minute. The second thing that I've done recently is I released War Pigs, which is a classic Black Sabbath song that we covered it, and I released it as part of Echolocation, which is going to be an album of about an hour's length, lots of different songs, a lot of heavy metal, a lot of loud volume, a lot of guitar, a lot of me making a lot of horrible noise with my face, and instead of releasing it all as one collection, which is kind of the traditional way you do things if you're releasing albums, I'm going to release it as the songs are done. As you know, the songs are finished and so on. We're working through the mixing and mastering phase, and as that's completed, I'll post it, and then you can hear it instead of sort of, you know, in the old days when you would record a record, you kind of had to wait until the whole thing was done because you can't, you know, make a bunch of little records and expect people to come back and buy this whole thing. But the downside is that you'd have to make people wait, you know, say 2 years or 3 years or whatever, or if you're Tool, you know, a million years between albums, because, you know, you'd have to finish all those tracks, and that's just kind of how it works. Same thing with CDs and so on. But, you know, when you're releasing stuff on the internet like I do, you know, you don't really have to wait. You can just go, well, I've done a song and I'm just releasing it. So even though I'm kind of putting it together logically in a collection that I'm calling Echolocation, realistically, it's, you know, I can release those anytime they're ready to go. So that's what I'm doing. So the next one will be out not too long from now, and I don't want to say too much about that because I have a bad habit of saying way more about what my plans are way too soon, and then I regret it later. So that's the thing I gotta learn to stop. So one of the things that I've been doing is when the Little Temple was released, like The Undivided Heart before it, I released it instead of charging a certain amount for each song, it's just pay as you want, including zero. So if you go to the Red Heaven Bandcamp website, so it's redheavenlive.bandcamp.com, or just go to redheaven.ca, it's all there. If you go there and you want to buy those songs and you've got no money, you can still have them. And you can either stream them right off the website or you can download them or whatever you want, but you can pay what you want. And if you've got like tons and tons of money and you just think like, wow, I want to give Red Heaven lots of extra money because I'm tired of setting fire to it in my front lawn, you can do that too. And there's a reason I did that. And I thought about it a lot. As a matter of fact, I even went back and changed the price setting for our first two albums, Amplification and Moth, on Bandcamp. On iTunes, I can't do anything about it. That price is set. I can't adjust that. It's not in my hands. It's not my. I don't have the ability to change that. At least I think some of the more famous and sort of big deal singers, like if you're Beyonce, you can kind of tell Apple like I want this to be free, and Apple will probably not like it, but they'll at least take your call. Whereas with me, there's just no way. So I price them pay what you want because I feel like there's a confluence of factors for me as the musician I am, as the person I am, and at the point I am sort of in the stage of my growth as a musician and as a guy with a career as a musician, and a lot of other factors where I just kind of felt like, you know, first of all, people just generally don't buy albums. And so when I release an album and I say, give me $10 or whatever for the album, or 12 or whatever, I don't know. But when I release that, There's some people who buy it. My mom buys one, a few other people buy them, and then it just kind of dies after that. Once every few months now, somebody will buy a copy of my original, my first two albums, and that's fine. It's not that I take personal offense to that. I'm not a real big deal, so I don't expect albums to be flying off the shelf or, however it is you acquire them. But it does say to me that, the pricing thing is a barrier. And I think in my mind, I feel like I just want people to be able to have the music. That's sort of most important. I'm not really at a point where I expect to pay my rent with album sales and so on. And there's a bit of a traditional, I don't want to say mythology, but it goes back a long ways where musicians think, I'm going to get discovered, I'm going to get signed, the record company is going to give me $1 bazillion, and then my albums are going to sell like crazy, and I'm going to have a $10 bazillion, and that's just how it's all going to work. And I know a lot of musicians who get to my age, I'm 48, and a lot of musicians get to like 48, 50, or past that, and their hearts are broken, because they've been playing bars for decades, and clubs or whatever, and they've released some albums that they financed on their own, but generally what they're waiting for is for some guy in a suit to come in. He's got a cigar and he goes, "I like you, kid. I like the cut of your, whatever his jib is, and I'm gonna make you a star." So he says, "And here's $1 million," so you can't say no. And the musician says, "Oh, great," and then they just go on, and it's awesome. And that just generally doesn't happen. I mean, you kind of go like, "Well, Beyonce has that," and that's true, but generally it's one of those things where like you are literally more likely to be hit by lightning while being eaten by a shark than you are to get that deal. And even when you get it, the deals tend to be nowhere as sweet as I think the romanticized version of being discovered would suggest. So, for instance, it's very common for risk-averse corporations, which is what record companies are. I'm not calling on the record companies. They do what they got to do, and they do it their way, and it works for some people, and that's totally fine. But the contracts tend to be, we will lend you, I don't know, like $250,000 or whatever for the studio time, and then you will repay us through your royalties. And what's interesting about that is that the royalties, so when the album sells, the record company takes their share, and they take your share, and they repay the studio time, and they repay the promoters and the marketers, and they repay, and this is true, I'm not being hyperbolic, they repay the caterers, like everybody gets paid before you, and then they pay you. And the interesting thing is that the contract's often set up so that they don't even have to release the album. If you do the album, they lend you the money and you do the album, and then they go, we don't think this is going to fly, so we're just not going to release it, and you still owe them $250,000. That's not how all the contracts are, but it's a good example of how those contracts kind of come to be. So that's a bit of a digression, and I apologize for doing that. But what I do want to say is I don't want to get on that treadmill. I don't want to sign that contract. It's not exactly like somebody's lining up around the block to give me that contract, but just, theoretically, that's not really where I want to go. But I want to make the music available so I don't kind of withhold and sort of say like, well, you've got to do something for me, and then you can hear the music. And this is not to say I don't agree with a business model associated with music. I'm not one of those people who says like, well, art wants to be free, so it's okay if I just take it. It's not okay. I'm not fine with that. But what I'm doing is I'm lowering the barrier so the music can go out. But there's another reason too, and this is a much more interesting thing, and which is that people want to pay for music, and I really believe that. I think the barrier to it, well, there are a lot of barriers which are introduced so that people have a hard time paying with music. One is, if in the era where you would buy a CD, for instance, you like one song on the CD, and then you got to buy like 16 other songs too that you're not as into. Well, it's ridiculous. There's like what how does the consumer benefit from that business model? Not very well. And so that doesn't make sense. Or a thing where the pricing is ridiculous, where it's like you can borrow this song for 24 hours and pay $5. Actually, I don't even know anybody ever done that. But when Apple's iTunes came along, it showed something that was really important. A lot of people missed the point. I mean, I don't know how to say it any more kindly than that, but they did. And the point was, if you remove the barriers, if you make it easy to get a hold of music that people want, and you make it quick and you price it reasonably, people will pay. And this is one of the ways that Apple became just huge and extremely rich. And whatever you think about Apple, the reality persists that people will pay for music if you make it easy, and you sort of put it in front of them, and you make it reasonable. Now, my personal experience is I put a lot of music out. That's I put out The Undivided Heart last year. I put out The Little Temple this year. And what's interesting is both of those releases were pay what you want. It's the first time I did that. And people would download it and keep it and pay nothing, and that was fine. I knew that was going to happen. I invited that to happen. I told people, if you don't have the money, don't worry about it. And I meant that too. That's just kind of, the size of Red Heaven is so small. We're a real D of a D-lister band kind of thing. So the gift that comes with that is I have the ability to form personal relationships with a lot of people who listen to music. Whereas, when you're like Bon Jovi or whatever, you don't have that luxury. People just sort of show up in a swarm. We don't have the swarm problem, which is both blessing and a curse. But the point that I wanted to make is that, people would download and not pay anything, and that was fine. But then you would get somebody who would download like a song and would pay $50 for it. And why? Like, conventional wisdom says, like, well, if you don't have to pay, you won't, like that kind of thing, which is crazy because, on paper that makes sense, and I think in a cynical world that makes sense, but it did not end up being consistent with my experience. I would get people who would pay way more than like the $12 or whatever it is that you charge for an album, and there's no explanation. There's no reasonable explanation for it, unless you take into consideration that people want to pay something that they think is fair for something that they value, and I believe that. And this is something that I think that corporations and a lot of individuals have trouble kind of getting through their head, which is that if you leave the door open and you make it, as Amanda Palmer says, you don't force them to pay, you ask them to pay, you invite them to pay, and then you just see what happens. It's a lot harder to control, it's a lot harder to predict, and somewhere down the road I may have to change that method depending on what my situation is. I got a lot to learn still, so there's a lot I don't know, and depending on who I partner with, I may have to adjust that scheme. Like I said, anytime I put anything through iTunes, I have to pay for it, or I have to ask people to pay for it whether I want them to or not. But for me right now, with Red Heaven, with all my albums, with Amplification, Moth, The Undivided Heart, The Little Temple, and everything that will go on Echolocation, and everything I'm going to do forward from here, I'm going to hold on to the pay what you want scheme for as long as I possibly can, because I believe in it. And I don't just believe in it, it's paid off for me. When you, like I said, if you force somebody to pay $12, they'll pay $12. If you leave the door open, then when somebody feels like paying more, they will. And that's happened for me. That's not just the sort of a cross your fingers and hope for the best thing. That's what actually happens. So The Little Temple can be acquired through redheaven.ca, like all the albums can. The new song War Pigs, released for Echolocation, can be acquired probably through definitely through redheaven.ca. I just haven't put it there yet. So, and there will be more. I'm going to be announcing something new. I'm doing a lot this year, so I'll be announcing something new shortly, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that was podcast number 3, video podcast number 3. Until next time.